Mid-19th century Glasgow was an industrial machine built to consume cheap labor. For a 14-year-old orphan in 1855, life offered no legal standing, no money, and no path to independence. When Margaret DeWitt joined the Mormon church, the social cost was immediate. Her older sister, Belle, considered the conversion a family disgrace. She restricted Margaret to a single rented room and used physical beatings to try and break her resolve. Margaret responded by leading a secret double life. She told her sister she was attending night school, but used those hours to attend religious meetings and study the faith she intended to join. She was spiritually committed, but physically and financially trapped. Without a single shilling of her own, she was a prisoner in a one-room apartment with no way to reach the community she had chosen. Her escape required a clandestine infusion of capital. Her sister Jane, already in Massachusetts, sent a secret wire transfer to fund Margaret's passage across the Atlantic. Margaret became a walking vault. She hid the money in the bosom of her dress during the day and kept it inside her shoe at night, waiting for the exact moment to run. She left on a washing day, walking out as if heading to the factory. To avoid suspicion, she took nothing but her clothes and a single nightcap she snatched from a bleaching green and stuffed into her pocket. The stakes were literal. Rewards were posted for her capture, forcing her to use a disguise and hide in the ship's steerage until the sailing vessel Isaac Wright cleared the docks. Once the ship was in open water, she finally moved to the deck. She watched the Scottish coastline vanish, knowing she would never see her brothers or sisters again. This wasn't a simple trip. By boarding that ship, Margaret liquidated her entire past, trading every familiar tie for a high-risk gamble on a new continent. Holyoke, Massachusetts, was a waypoint. The ocean crossing exhausted her sister's gift, and the 1,000-mile trek to Utah required fresh capital. Margaret treated the factory floor as a wealth-building engine. She quickly mastered the steam looms, earning an unprecedented 6-machine workload. Her strategy was built on extreme punctuality. Every morning, she sat at the factory doors, waiting for the watchman, ensuring she was at her loom the moment the steam engine started. She calculated that 10 minutes of extra work every day would eventually add up to dollars and cents. While other workers arrived late, Margaret's discipline allowed her to out-earn even the most experienced hands in the building. She maintained this relentless pace for 3 years, living in a boarding house and saving every penny that didn't go toward food or lodging. Her passage west was the result of industrial mastery. She transformed 3 years of repetitive labor into the precise capital needed for the frontier. She handed over $60 in cash for a spot in the company, but that only covered her entry. It didn't buy her a seat in a wagon. To pay for her keep, Margaret walked every mile across the plains. She worked as a cook and nanny for a family of 10, essentially trading her physical endurance for her daily rations. The physical toll was constant. She carried an infant while walking through the dust, baked bread over open campfires, and spent her nights battling mosquito swarms that left the children screaming. When the loads became too heavy for the teams, she abandoned her only new possession, a trunk, and stuffed her remaining clothes into sacks to lighten the burden on the animals. The journey was marked by extremes. Some nights were spent dancing to fiddle music on the prairie. Other days were spent passing graves that had been torn open by coyotes. After 3 months of walking, Margaret reached Salt Lake City. She had physically liquidated her own strength to buy her way into Zion. She arrived in September 1859 and immediately went back to work. With her first local wages, she bought a custom-made wooden chest, her first permanent asset in her new life. At 19, she married Alexander DeWitt. He was a fellow immigrant who had overcome his own fears of the territory to embrace the same faith Margaret had risked everything for in Scotland. Their life was one of continuous expansion. They were called to settle the Arizona frontier, moving to the desert landscapes of Springerville and Woodruff to build homes where none existed. Margaret spent 67 years as a Relief Society teacher, a role she began while carrying her first child and continued until she was 88 years old. Her vitality never stalled. At 65, she taught herself to play the organ. At 87, she was still dancing into the new year. Margaret DeWitt died at 89, having personally financed every stage of her migration from the slums of Glasgow to the high deserts of Arizona. By mastering the machines of the East and walking every mile of the trail herself, Margaret had paid the full market price for her own autonomy. She didn't just find a new life, she earned it through decades of calculated, disciplined labor.